British comedies of the post-war era weren't just a laugh, they were a mirror held up to a nation in flux. While Hollywood was busy selling glossy dreams, Britain was busy poking fun at authority, class, and even itself. But here's the twist. Many of these gems never made it big across the Atlantic. So, which films slipped under American noses yet still shine like hidden treasures? Let's dig into the laughs they missed. School for Scoundrels, 1960. What if you could take a class on outsmarting your rivals in everyday life? That's the wickedly clever idea behind School for Scoundrels, a film that turns social climbing into an Olympic sport. Ian Carmichael plays Henry Palfrey, a timid man constantly bullied by brash rivals. He discovers the School of Lifemanship, run by the brilliant Alastair Sim, who teaches him how to gain the upper hand in business, romance, and status. The comedy thrives on its mix of satire and slapstick. Terry Thomas, the king of smarmy charm, plays Carmichael's swaggering nemesis, delivering lines with such oily confidence that you almost root for his arrogance, almost. But Sim steals the show, portraying the sly headmaster of manipulation, with a twinkle that makes you wonder if he's pulling tricks on the audience too. What makes this film more than just a farce is its cultural bite. Released in 1960, Britain was reshaping its class system, and many ordinary folks wanted to break free from rigid social ladders. The film turned those frustrations into comedy gold, asking a cheeky question: why play fair when you can outwit? Though overlooked in the US, School for Scoundrels has aged like fine wine. It's not just about winning, it's about laughing at the absurd rules society makes us follow. The Bells of St. Trinian's, 1954. Chaos in a girls' school has never been this gleeful. The Bells of St. Trinian's introduced the world to the most anarchic bunch of students ever put on film, and they made Hogwarts look like a quiet library. Alastair Sim, in one of his finest double performances, plays both the headmistress Miss Fritton and her shady twin brother, bringing outrageous comedy to every scene. The plot? St. Trinian's is a school where discipline doesn't exist. The girls run the show, and every teacher is either terrified or corrupt. When the school's financial troubles boil over, scams, schemes, and sheer chaos take over. It's outrageous, sharp, and way ahead of its time in skewering authority. Audiences in Britain loved the rebellious spirit. Post-war society was still pushing conformity, but here was a film that said, what if the kids ruled? Americans, on the other hand, weren't sure what to make of it. The humor was too British, too mischievous, too willing to laugh at authority rather than respect it. The film's legacy lives on. It sparked an entire saint. Trinian's franchise proving that audiences weren't done laughing at chaos in uniform. More than a schoolyard comedy, it was a gleeful celebration of rebellion. Brothers-in-Law, 1957. If you've ever wondered what would happen if the legal profession was run by bumbling amateurs, Brothers-in-Law has the answer. This comedy follows a young, nervous barrister, played by Ian Carmichael, who stumbles through courtroom trials, social missteps, and endless embarrassment while trying to prove he belongs in the stuffy world of law. Richard Attenborough adds spark as his more confident rival, delivering a contrast that makes Carmichael's awkwardness even funnier. The courtroom scenes are pure comic chaos, mix-ups with evidence, grand speeches that collapse into nonsense, and judges who barely keep a straight face. What gives it staying power is how it satirizes the legal establishment without ever being mean-spirited. Released in the late 1950s, it struck a chord with audiences who saw professions like law as untouchable pillars of respectability. By showing lawyers as clumsy, vain, and deeply human, the film gave viewers permission to laugh at the supposedly serious world of justice. Though it never crossed into American popularity, it's a small classic in Britain. More than a series of gags, Brothers-in-Law is a reminder that no matter how polished a profession looks from the outside, there's always room for human folly and a lot of laughter. Carlton-Browne of the F.O., 1959. Colonial politics, British diplomacy, and Terry Thomas in his element. Carlton-Browne of the F.O. isn't just a comedy, it's a sharp jab at Britain's fading empire. Terry Thomas plays the delightfully clueless Carlton-Browne, a Foreign Office official sent to oversee a small, strategically unimportant island. Naturally, disaster follows, with bureaucracy, greed, and blundering leadership colliding in one hilarious mess. This film works because it's fearless in its satire. At a time when Britain's empire was shrinking and its influence waning, the film turned political anxiety into sharp comedy. Terry Thomas, with his trademark gap-toothed grin and bumbling arrogance, was the perfect embodiment of Britain's old ruling class stumbling through modern politics. Peter Sellers also appears in a supporting role, adding his own flavor of eccentricity that makes the ensemble even richer. The story skewers everything from red tape diplomacy to Britain's awkward relationship with its colonies, all while delivering laughs that sting as much as they entertain. Though ignored in America, Carlton-Browne of the FO is one of those films that dares to laugh at power. It's not just a comedy about a man in over his head. It's a sly farewell to Britain's imperial pretensions. Doctor in the House, 1954. Think medical school is tough? Try surviving it with Dirk Bogarde and his crew of mischievous students in Doctor in the House. This comedy launched an entire franchise, and for good reason. It was relatable, riotous, and just a little cheeky. Bogarde plays Simon Sparrow, a young medical student navigating hospital life with a mix of earnestness and mischief. Alongside him, a gang of fellow students blunder through exams, romance, and hospital bureaucracy. The humor comes not from grand plots, but from the everyday trials of medical life, botched diagnoses, awkward encounters with patients, and professors who are more intimidating than helpful. What gave this film its punch was timing. Released in 1954, the National Health Service was still new, and doctors were suddenly national figures. By turning the medical profession into a playground for comedy, the film struck a nerve with audiences who were both fascinated by and wary of the new healthcare system. It was a runaway success in Britain, grossing millions and spawning sequels. Yet in America, it barely registered, perhaps because its understated humor didn't fit the louder Hollywood style. But for British audiences, Doctor in the House was more than comedy. It was catharsis, laughter in the face of a changing world. Make Mine Mink, 1960. Ever imagine a group of respectable pensioners turning into master thieves? That's the delightful absurdity of Make Mine Mink, a comedy caper with Terry Thomas, Hattie Jacques, and Athene Sailor, leading a gang of retirees who decide to steal mink coats from high-end shops. The genius of the film lies in its inversion of expectations. Instead of young rebels, we get older characters tired of their dull lives, who suddenly discover the thrill of crime. Their heists are clumsy, hilarious, and often more trouble than they're worth, but their enthusiasm makes them impossible not to root for. Terry Thomas adds his usual flair as the smooth-talking ringleader, but it's the elderly conspirators who steal the show, literally. The humor reflects post-war Britain's class anxieties. Luxury goods like mink coats symbolized wealth and status. Yet here we had ordinary pensioners gleefully snatching them from the upper class. It was satire wrapped in a caper, turning crime into an act of cheeky rebellion. In America, the film barely made a ripple, but in Britain, it was embraced as a quirky hit. Audiences loved the idea that even the most unassuming neighbors could be harboring criminal fantasies. More than just a heist film, Make Mine Mink is a sly reminder that fun, freedom, and a little anarchy aren't just for the young. Heavens Above, 1963. What happens when kindness collides with capitalism? In Heavens Above, Peter Sellers delivers one of his most underrated performances as Reverend John Smallwood, a well-meaning clergyman assigned to a wealthy parish. Instead of fitting in, he turns the community upside down with his insistence on generosity, fairness, and compassion. The result is chaos. Wealthy parishioners are horrified when Smallwood gives away their resources to the poor. Shopkeepers balk when he insists on free food for the needy, and the entire town begins to unravel under the weight of his relentless goodness. Sellers plays it with wide-eyed sincerity, making Smallwood both sympathetic and frustrating, a man so determined to live by his ideals that he can't see the storm he's causing. Released in 1963, the film hit a nerve in Britain, where class divides were still sharp and the welfare state was under scrutiny. By turning generosity into a disruptive force, the comedy asked an uncomfortable question. Do we really want fairness if it costs us our comforts? Ignored in the U.S., Heavens Above remains a sharp, funny, and surprisingly daring piece of satire. It proves that sometimes the biggest troublemakers aren't rebels or crooks. They're the ones who actually take kindness seriously. The Smallest Show on Earth, 1957. Picture this. A young couple inherits a rundown cinema with peeling paint, faulty projectors, and 3 eccentric employees who seem as outdated as the building itself. That's the setup for The Smallest Show on Earth, a charming love letter to British eccentricity starring Virginia McKenna, Bill Travers, and a scene-stealing Peter Sellers. The comedy comes from their attempt to revive the decrepit bijou kinema, nicknamed the Flea Pit, while competing with a flashy new cinema down the street. Instead of efficiency and glamour, the bijou runs on chaos, stubborn pride, and the quirks of its oddball staff. Sellers is unforgettable as Mr. Quill, the drunken projectionist, who somehow manages to keep the reels running while barely staying upright. This wasn't just a slapstick romp. It was Britain's way of laughing at its own fading traditions. Post-war small neighborhood cinemas were struggling against shiny new movie houses, just as the country itself wrestled with modernization. For audiences, the story of the Flea Pit was both hilarious and bittersweet. American audiences missed the joke, but in Britain, the film became a quiet favorite. The Smallest Show on Earth endures as a charming reminder that sometimes it's the broken down, chaotic places that hold the most heart. Innocence in Paris, 1953. 6 British travelers, 1 city of romance, and endless comic mishaps. Innocence in Paris is a delightful ensemble comedy that follows a mix of tourists, from stuffy diplomats to nervous newlyweds, as they stumble through the cultural and romantic traps of the French capital. Alastair Sim is the standout as a pompous parliamentarian who finds himself utterly bewildered by Parisian customs. Margaret Rutherford also sparkles as a dreamy traveler swept up in the glamour of the city. Each storyline pokes fun at the British abroad, their awkwardness, their stubborn manners, and their inability to let go of their own cultural baggage. For post-war audiences, the film tapped into something new: foreign travel. With restrictions easing and Europe opening up, ordinary Britons were beginning to dream of holidays abroad. The comedy captured the excitement, anxiety, and sheer ridiculousness of encountering other cultures for the first time. Though it barely registered in America, Innocence in Paris resonated at home. It was both a travel fantasy and a satire on national pride, showing that sometimes the funniest part of travel isn't the scenery, it's the traveler. The Horse's Mouth, 1958. Alec Guinness had already mastered understatement in the Ealing comedies, but in The Horse's Mouth, he let loose as one of cinema's great eccentrics. Playing Gully Jimson, a scruffy, obsessive painter, Guinness delivered a performance that was both hilarious and heartbreaking. Jimson is an artist who cares nothing for money, manners, or social rules. He scams, bullies, and charms his way into painting massive murals wherever he can, often leaving chaos in his wake. Guinness, who also wrote the screenplay, gives him a manic energy that makes him impossible to ignore. Part genius, part menace, part clown. The comedy lies in the sheer audacity of Jimson's antics, breaking into homes to use their walls as canvases, conning wealthy patrons, and dismissing every attempt to make him conform. Yet beneath the laughter is a darker truth about the thin line between artistic brilliance and madness. Released in 1958, the film was too quirky for mainstream America, but in Britain, it struck a chord with audiences fascinated by post-war bohemian life. The Horse's Mouth remains a hidden treasure, a comedy that dares to ask whether genius is worth the mess it leaves behind. The Green Man, 1956. What if the man sent to kill you was also the funniest person in the room? That's the darkly comic premise of The Green Man, with Alastair Sim as Harry Hawkins, a professional assassin who plans his next hit in a quiet English boarding house. What could be a grim thriller instead becomes a sparkling farce of mistaken identities, bungled plans, and absurd timing. Sim plays Hawkins with delicious understatement, his dry wit making the idea of a killer both sinister and hysterical. Add in George Cole as the hapless vacuum cleaner salesman who stumbles onto the plot, and you get a comedy of errors that moves like clockwork. Every phone call, every door opened at the wrong moment, every misplaced bomb pushes the tension higher and the laughs sharper. The brilliance of The Green Man lies in its ability to mix menace with mirth. Britain in the 1950s was still haunted by wartime shadows, and here was a film that dared to make fun of fear itself. Instead of treating death with solemnity, it turned it into a farce where the scariest man in the building might also be the most ridiculous. It was overlooked across the Atlantic, but in Britain it cemented Alastair Sim's reputation as the master of eccentric comedy. The Green Man reminds us that laughter and danger are sometimes only a hair's breadth apart, and that a ticking bomb can be just as funny as it is terrifying. Raising a Riot, 1955. Think managing one child is hard? Try handling 3 when you're completely unprepared. That's the setup for Raising a Riot, a family comedy starring Kenneth More as a father left alone to look after his children while his wife is away. Predictably, chaos erupts, yet the chaos is delivered with charm rather than cruelty. The film is packed with domestic disasters, food fights in the kitchen, squabbles that spiral out of control, and neighbors scandalized by the racket. Moore plays the exasperated dad with a mix of helplessness and good humor, capturing the universal experience of every parent who realizes too late that kids run the house, not adults. But the comedy isn't just slapstick. Released in the mid-1950s, the film reflected the new emphasis on family life in post-war Britain. With men returning from military service and women moving back from wartime work to home life, domestic roles were in flux. Raising a Riot poked fun at those shifting dynamics, showing that fathers could be just as hopeless as kids when left in charge. Though never a big export to America, the film charmed British audiences with its warm humor and relatability. It's a reminder that sometimes the most universal comedies don't need big themes or elaborate plots. They just need a dad, 3 kids, and a home turned upside down. Crooks Anonymous, 1962. What if criminals went to rehab, not for their habits, but for their crimes? That's the quirky concept behind Crooks Anonymous, a comedy starring Leslie Phillips and Stanley Baxter. The film introduces us to Dodger Lane, a chronic thief who is recruited into a secret organization designed to cure criminals of their bad habits. The fun comes from the absurd training methods. Instead of therapy, recruits are subjected to bizarre drills, temptations, and moral lessons designed to break their addiction to crime. Phillips plays it with suave charm, while Baxter leans into the slapstick chaos of a crook who just can't stop himself from grabbing whatever isn't nailed down. The film's deeper bite is in its satire of social reform. Post-war Britain was full of organizations promising to fix society's problems with new institutions and schemes. Crooks Anonymous pokes fun at this idealism, asking whether people really change, or if crooks will always be crooks. Though never a hit in the US, the film holds up as one of Britain's most inventive comedies of the early 1960s. It mixes heist movie tension with absurd social commentary, wrapping it all in laughs. Crooks Anonymous shows that even the best intentions can turn ridiculous when human nature refuses to play along. Laughter in Paradise, 1951. 4 greedy relatives. 4 absurd challenges. 1 inheritance hanging in the balance. That's the recipe for Laughter in Paradise, a farcical comedy that begins with the death of a wealthy prankster. Instead of leaving his fortune outright, he forces his heirs to complete humiliating tasks before they can claim their money. Alastair Sim once again proves why he was Britain's king of comedy, playing a crime writer forced to actually commit a robbery to qualify for his inheritance. Watching the usually proper Sim bumble through crime is a highlight, while George Cole adds sly charm in his supporting role. Each storyline is a miniature farce in itself, from awkward romances to professional disasters, all converging in one big payoff. The film resonated with audiences because it tapped into a post-war fascination with wealth and morality. Britain was still under rationing in the early 1950s, and the idea of money being dangled as a reward for ridiculous acts struck a chord. It asked a cheeky question: what would you do for a fortune? Though little seen in America, Laughter in Paradise was a hit in Britain, blending heart with hilarity. It's proof that comedy doesn't need spectacle, just ordinary people caught in extraordinary schemes. Man in the Cocked Hat, 1959-1969. Sometimes the best comedies are the ones that bite the hardest. Man in the Cocked Hat, originally a retitled version of Carlton-Browne of the F.O. for its re-release, was so sharp in its satire that it shocked the very establishment it mocked. Terry Thomas returns as the bumbling face of British diplomacy, once again fumbling through international negotiations with a mixture of arrogance and incompetence. This time, the humor leans even more heavily on Britain's declining global power. The film ridicules the pomp and ceremony of the Foreign Office, showing diplomats as more concerned with appearances than results. Every attempt at negotiation collapses into absurdity. Every plan backfires, and every character is revealed as hopelessly out of touch. For audiences in Britain, it was a rare chance to laugh at the very institutions that still clung to old-world prestige. For American audiences, though, it never landed, partly because the satire was so specifically aimed at British politics and class structures. Today, Man in the Cocked Hat feels like a time capsule of Britain's shifting identity. It's not just a comedy about a foolish man in power, it's a sly obituary for empire itself, written in jokes rather than history books. So, there you have it. 15 more British post-war comedies that America shrugged at, but Britain adored. These films weren't just entertainment. They were sly, rebellious snapshots of a country laughing through change. From bungling diplomats to anarchic schoolgirls, they prove comedy can be as sharp as any political speech. Which of these overlooked gems do you think deserves a modern revival? Drop your thoughts below, share this with a film-loving friend, and don't forget to subscribe because the best laughs are always the ones people nearly forgot.